streams, just the highlights. So, swoop. That, folks, is my swoop. It's the Norwegian fire-farting dragon. You can sneak up on that one from behind. All right. Let's see what the jury questions are. Let's see, where am I? 4:28 and some seconds.
Ready? All right. There are several jury questions here, and just for the record, there was no objections to any of the questions from counsel or the court. So I'll go ahead and ask you all the questions submitted by the jurors. Do you feel that Americans are obligated to speak to you/CNN?
No, no one is obligated to speak to us. It is their free decision if they choose to or don't choose to.
All right. To what length must someone go to in order not to speak to you? Must they speak to you to not speak with you?
It's a really good question. There's a lot of people that I have a responsibility to. Sorry, this is gonna be a little bit of a long answer, but I'll try to keep it. There's a lot of people that I have responsibility to when I'm writing a story. I have a responsibility to the people who are appearing in the story, in this case, Afghans and Mr. Young. I also have a responsibility to the American public, the American taxpayer, particularly when I'm writing about government activities so that they understand how their money is being spent. When there is as in this case, we had evidence that there was somebody who might be profiting off of the misery of others, off of this just cataclysmically tragic situation in Afghanistan, I felt that the higher priority that I had was to continue to push for answers from Mr. Young, rather than to sort of back away from the hunt for answers here. Because in this instance, I was thinking about Afghans trying to get out of the country, and I was thinking about the many service members and former agency officers, CIA officers who I knew for whom this was incredibly personal and incredibly painful. This notion that there were people that were going to be left behind. And so that was of a higher consideration at that moment than to stop pursuing trying to talk to Mr. Young. It's never. I guess the answer to that is sort of there's always a lot of different considerations that go into the question of like, when do you say, okay, I'm going to stop engaging with somebody?
Perfect lead into the next question. At what point do you accept someone not wishing to speak or comment?
It very, very much depends on the context. It depends on sort of what judgment I or my news organization can make about sort of what the greater priority is. And in this instance, I felt that the higher priority was determining whether or not there was truth to the allegations contained in some of these text messages that my colleague Alex had received that suggested that Mr. Young might be profiting off of this situation.
Do they lose this right as they express discomfort or evade questions?
The right not to speak to me?
Yeah, it was a follow-up to the last question. So yeah, to not speak or comment.
Oh yeah, no, you always have the right to not speak or comment. You are, he could have, Mr. Young could have simply never, well, first of all, he reached out to me, but he could have never reached out. He could have stopped answering any of my questions. He could have completely disengaged. He did none of those things. He continued to talk to me.
A chance to make your case to keep your name out of it sounds akin to guilty until proven innocent. Can you clarify how your approach is really the opposite, innocent until proven guilty?
Well, first of all, we're not a court of law. Like the standard for, whether somebody's conduct is newsworthy, whether it winds up in a news article is not whether it's illegal or not. It's in this instance, it is, whether it should be exposed that that someone could be profiting off of, the misery of Afghans. I know I keep saying that, but that was what made it worthy to me to continue asking questions. Like we had enough information about, we had enough, corroboration in the form of these text messages, essentially to suggest that there was a reason to be asking these questions, and so we were continuing to ask them. But had a case been made that there's more here, then we would have, backed away. Does that answer the question?
It wasn't answered.
I know.
This is a follow-up. Can you understand, given this fresh perspective, that your approach could scare someone? This is a follow-up to the questions about how you phrased the
Oh, I see. It's connected to the.
the last question.
I could understand as a hypothetical matter, how someone might be frightened by being approached by a reporter, but I would argue in this instance, Mr. Young was publicly advertising his services. He was on LinkedIn, a public forum, advertising that this is what he did and this is what he could offer. He also reached out to me, and so in that context, I'm not really sure how that could be, deemed scary.
All right. If you feel that vulnerable people are being taken advantage of, then is someone obligated to talk to you?
No one is ever obligated to talk to me. That is always their choice. But it is also my responsibility to try to get people to talk to me. That is my responsibility, is to seek information.
Do people have a right to not be named in a news story?
I'm tripping up on the word right, which is sort of why I'm.
Yeah, and I guess I said the court didn't have the objections. I'm not asking for a legal conclusion as to a right, but in your opinion.
If I believe it is the responsibility of news organizations and reporters like myself to think carefully about whether the conduct that we are going to expose and the person that we are going to name, whether that is newsworthy, whether it is in the public interest to know that this conduct is happening and that this named person is the one carrying it out. And in this instance, I feel very strongly that bar was met.
This is so insanely disingenuous. They knew more or less from the get-go that he only worked with sponsors. In 2 instances out of I don't know how many instances, he did not include the word sponsor, but in everything else he did. And they, again, from what we heard in yesterday's stream, somebody on the ground provided CNN with names of people who actually did what they were about to report on, and they didn't care. They never cared about these other people. They were zoning in on Zachary from day one, and they didn't care. They wanted to report on black market, human trafficking, more or less extorting Afghans to get out of there. And they wanted to connect Zachary to it. But they couldn't, because that's not his MO. It never were. So they had to invent it and play around and cherry pick just to make him fit in. They didn't care about Zachary. And they definitely didn't care about the Afghans. They cared about publicizing a story that got clicks so they could get some ad revenue, in my opinion.
All right, if Mr. Young cannot help an Afghan, what do you feel is an appropriate way to disengage?
I mean, a simple "I can't help," probably would have been enough. Simply blocking somebody without responding further. That seemed a little harsh to me, particularly when you couple that with his private comments about, well, let's let them run for the border and see how far they get.
Any follow-up, Mr. Eichler? Any follow-up?
Yes, just a couple questions. I think you just commented on the run for the border comment. David Lerner was an American, right?
I don't know who he was.
He lied to Zach about having a sponsor.
I don't know who he was, and I don't know anything about that exchange.
Can we put up PX-117 real quick? Can we go to 17, please? And we can zoom in on the top. So is there a sponsor able to pay? David says yes. Zach then provides his pricing. David says, I'm not corporate. So you understand, David didn't have a sponsor, right?
look, not knowing anything about this exchange, I could also interpret him to be saying, yes, I am the sponsor. Like, so I don't know.
It's reasonable to think that Zach just thought David was trying to waste his time, right?
I'm not a party to this exchange, but that's certainly not how I read it. It seems to me that Mr. Lerner here is asking some pretty reasonable questions that I too would have had.
When Zach tells him, have them run for the board, he's not saying to have human beings do it, is he?
I mean, that's my interpretation of this.
All right, well, just a couple more questions. You talked about the profiting off the misery of Afghans. Is that wrong in your view?
I think profiting off of the misery of other human beings, it's not something I would strive to do.
You were paid to report on the evacuation of Afghans, right?
Mhm.
No further questions.
Any redirect?